Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. Data centers in Prince George's County. The issue has drawn lots of opinions on both sides. Also, traffic fatalities continue to go up in the county with 3 more deaths this past weekend. What can lawmakers do to get drivers to slow down and pay attention to the roadways? Also, there's a big prayer breakfast and gospel concert on tap for later this month. How is faith helping to shape the county? We'll talk about those issues and much more tonight with my guest, Krystal Oriadha, Vice Chair of the Prince George's County Council. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sure thing. Let's first start with the very latest information. The county executive, Aisha Braveboy, is issuing an executive order putting a pause on data centers. Last week, hundreds of people came out to voice their opposition to proposed data centers in the county. There's a task force still underway. You are now proposing legislation to press pause on the data centers until the task force completes the work in November. Why issue legislation to do this, even as the task force is still working on a report?
Right. Because it's really important that we build back trust with the community that has been broken. The reality is that before I was elected and many of my colleagues, the council before us passed legislation to create a fast track process for data centers that would make sure that it wouldn't come before the council. So the time for the community to participate, for there to be a public hearing, was stripped away from the community. And many people heard about the Landover project. And the reality is that it was moving through the process without community engagement, without input from the county council. And we understand that we needed to have a real conversation about building revenue and generating revenue for the county. And data centers is a part of that conversation. It's the reason why the chair wanted to have that task force, is so that we could have the conversation in a way that includes community, stakeholders, and we could do it in a very transparent way. What we didn't know is that past people had made decisions that benefited industry without the community. And so the only way that we can move forward with having this conversation is to build back trust by saying, we know that this process was fast-tracked without you, and we know that that was not right. And the county executive is in line with us and council leadership and understanding that we're going to do different things differently here in Prince George's County. We are going to be more transparent, and we're going to be more accountable than what I think our community has seen before.
Let me make sure that I have a clear understanding so that also our listeners can understand this as well, particularly as it relates to the timeline. So the previous council, you're saying that the previous council was fast tracking this. In other words, they were putting legislation into place that would set data centers up for a vote. Is that correct?
No, so they passed legislation last cycle. Some of the colleagues that are currently serving on the council were part of that. The past representative for District 5. So what they did was pass legislation that allowed a fast track process for data centers. Usually there's a detailed site plan. There's plans that will come before the council. Communities will know that it's coming before the council, right? There's a public hearing. There's a space for people to testify and for us to have those conversations very transparently in the public. They passed legislation that removed that from happening, so that for example, the Landover project that the community is upset about never came before the county council. It skipped the county council altogether. And we don't believe that should have been part of the process. We think the community should be part of the process. We think that it should come before the county council. And that's one of the reasons why ourselves on the county council and the county executive move forward with the pause, is because we hear the community. This was done in the dark. It was done because of pressure from special interests and money, and it was not done in a transparent way that included the community.
So once again, if this was, as you say, done in the dark, that it would have skipped the county council. Okay, if it skipped the county council, where would it have gone? Who would have made the final decision?
Yeah, so it would only be the planning board. So this Landover project, for example, is an example of what the process would have looked like. It went through the entire development process and was now about to be in permitting. And no one knew that this project was moving.
Mm-hmm.
Council members weren't aware, community wasn't aware, because it never came before us. And it wasn't publicized in a way that was really transparent to the community. So the process would look like they'd submit to the planning board, they would review it, and then would go straight to permitting. And that was the track that this Landover project was on.
How can something like that happen?
It is, I talk about it a lot. It's the prime example of what happens when special interests really lead the conversation. The bill should have never passed, creating a fast track process that allows no consideration, especially if it's residential. I could understand if they had a task force like the one we're having, and we decide to create a fast track process for data centers in high heavy industrial areas where everyone has agreed this is where they should go. Because I understand making fast track processes for what we want, where we want it. The problem is we could all agree, does it make sense to go in a residential area? No, right? And so the fact that there was a fast track process created for a residential area makes no sense. And this is just the importance of the leadership. And this is the importance of making sure that we don't have money in politics, because when you have money in politics, sometimes, sadly, this is what the consequences of that can look like.
Before I drill down a little bit more about that, what is your feeling about data centers in general, not at the Landover site, but just period? I mean, would you support a data center in the county at all?
I think it's something we definitely need to consider and look at, right? But I think there's some things we're learning. We collectively, I think the entire region is learning from what's happening in Virginia, right? Some maybe unintended consequences that are happening there. But there's a reality that it is a huge revenue generator. And so I think what we're doing with the task force is what we should be doing with any of these major new technologies or development that we want to bring into the county. We're taking a look at it to say, if we moved in this direction, how can we do it in a way that we limit the unintended consequences? We put it in areas that make sense, and we create revenue for the community. I think it's something we definitely have to consider. We are at a $200+ million deficit that's going to continue to grow. So we have to do our due diligence to look at all revenue generating options to see if it makes sense for our county. Sometimes ideas will make sense when we, lift up the hood and look at it closely, and sometimes they won't. And I think we're in the fact-finding phase for data centers now.
What is the commercial entity that would own the data centers? Who are these entities that want to engage with the county to bring one to Prince George's County?
So it's different interests, because and I'm learning, right, as I attend the task force meetings, because sometimes you might think it's one business and they own this huge data center, but the reality of conceptually is that the space and facility could be owned by one person, and then there's many businesses that are using that one data center as storage. And so it could look different, but depending upon the size and who owns it. So it's something that we're learning more about and figuring out what would it look like, what we want it to look like if it comes here in the county. And so what we know is that it has worked to create revenue in some jurisdictions. But what we also know is it has put a strain on the infrastructure in some of those jurisdictions. And so we have to figure out, is there a way to do this without raising costs? Like what we see already happening to utility costs around the county is some people's utility bills are already doubling. And this is before we're seeing a strain on our infrastructure. And so I think we really have to look at what are the possible consequences versus benefits, and how do we do this in the most responsible way?
Well, I understand about the possibility of many businesses participating in a data center. But if you look at the Landover Mall site, for example, Lerner Enterprises owns the site.
Mm-hmm.
But when Landover Mall was there was Heck Company, there was Woody's, there was Garfinkel's, there was Sears. So I guess my question isn't about the Woody's, the Garfinkel's, the Raleigh's, the Sears. My question is, who is asking to come to Prince George's County?
For the Lerner site specifically, I'm not sure who it is that they're working with. I know that this is a project that learners would like to see come to their property. So sometimes some of the direction is spearheaded by the landowner, and they're going out there trying to court industry to come and bring whatever product or business that they're looking for. And in this case, with this project, I know it's something that learners is trying to see their site used for. And what we know when we talk about these big businesses, we know they're 9 times out of 10, they're not going to be local to Prince George's County. They're going to be outside companies coming in to do partnerships with these landowners, especially when it comes to data centers. But I'm not familiar with who they've been working with on the Lerner project, because they haven't come to me to talk about the project, and they haven't come to many council members to meet with them about this project and what it would look like.
That I know Council Member Wallaby Gay said last week that the meeting at the planning board was not about the land oversight, and so I guess my question is, okay, if it wasn't about the land oversight, where did that come from?
Where did the land oversight come from?
Yeah, she said last week's meeting was not about the land oversight. Everybody's talking about the land oversight. So I guess I'm questioning the validity of that statement, because the reality is that that's the only site that anyone has really been talking about.
Right. And I think this goes back to the timeline and the importance of people understanding what was happening from our vantage point. We knew there was a conversation around data centers when we first got elected. And we felt like, and the chair led this with his legislation around the task force, is that if we were going to go in this direction of having data centers, we should have a task force to discuss it first. And so we introduced that legislation. Now, mind you, we were not aware of the fast track process that had already passed under the old leadership and old council, nor were we aware of this project that Landover was moving, because what most developers do, they meet with the district representative of wherever that project is. And they, to my knowledge, met with that individual, the individual that supported the fast track process before we got there. And so when it was brought to our attention was under the new leadership. When Shayla Stafford got elected and did her due diligence as a new member and is finding out what are all the projects moving and where they are in her community, she was shocked to find how far along this project was, and that it was never going to come before her, and that her community didn't know anything about the project. So we were honest in the fact that we never were going to move forward with data centers without doing the task force. What we were unaware of is that deals had already been cut in the dark before any of us were elected to these seats. And they had been moving this one project through the process in the pipeline without the stakeholders or the community being aware of it. And sadly, that's what happened. But as soon as it was brought to our attention, that's why we moved forward with the resolution about pausing, why the county executives stepped up immediately to do something, because we realized what happened hurt the community's ability to trust the process and what we're doing right now. A lot of people, like you said, they think that we were doing this task force as lip service while we were secretly moving a project along, which is not true, right? all the new leaders were shocked about this, and we're doing our level best to reset and build back trust, which is the reason why the executive order and the resolution to show the community that we're with them. This should not have been done in the way it was done.
Hold that point, because we have much more to talk about this and other issues. I need to take a quick break and remind our listeners that you can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The Original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR-FM. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 at 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We are talking about all things Prince George's County, including the latest on the data center issue in the county. My guest is Krystal Oriadha. She is the vice chair of the Prince George's County Council. We have seen this kind of controversy and dust up in Virginia. So I guess I have still so many questions. Let us say, for example, and let me first go back. If this had been permitted by the planning board, and I need to be clear for our listeners. So you're saying, just like any other permitting process, if you permit to build a 7-Eleven or a Wawa or a playground, and it doesn't go through the Prince George's County Council, but the planning board permits it, once it is permitted, it can go forward. Is that accurate?
It's accurate if that's the process. Most things do need a detailed site plan, right? Like that's what makes this not normal. You know, we are used to projects coming before us as a council, but to your point, it's through that process. Now there's other hurdles, like with WSSC or any other evaluations that have to happen with DPI, but it'll be out of the planning process. It's skipping over the council is what it's doing here, and then it's going straight into DPI and all of the permitting, and they all have their own individual processes.
Do you, how can I ask this? Do you think that do you believe that there was a bit of, why do you think this has happened this way? Why did this have to be discovered? I mean, there's more than just, there's a process that we didn't know about, so let's just put the brakes on it. It just seems to me to be somewhat more clandestine.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm always going to be honest, even sometimes to my detriment, but I really feel like it is just a prime example of money in politics, and people can follow the money. People can see that legislation came forward looking for this fast track process that would skip the council and transparency and public hearings. It passed. And then people can see people getting contributions to their campaign account, right? From Learner or other people that might be invested in this data center moving. And to me, that's the reality of it. I can't think of any other reason that this would have unfolded in this way if it wasn't for the intentionality of someone wanting to hide this from their community. That is the only thing that makes sense to me, and to do it for a benefit of financial contribution. And so it's sad. It's what makes it hard for, I think, those of us that really do believe in transparency, really do want the community involved, that are trying to do the right thing, that are trying to make sure that we're holding both things equally, right? We want to create revenue, but we also want to listen to our community and our residents and make sure they have a seat at the table. But then sadly, sometimes you have people moving in ways that constantly are just eroding the trust between the government and the community.
Who do you believe that is the case?
You said, who do I believe?
Yeah, who? Yes.
I believe the former member that represented District 5, Councilmember Jolene Ivy. Like I said, all of our finance, all of our campaign contributions are public record. Our voting record is public record, right? And this is the district in which it was planned to be in. And so I think when things like this happen, like what we saw with past leadership in Westphalia, right? When the Amazon was coming in, we all as individual district members know that when projects are coming to our community, that one of the first people they speak to is the representative of that district. And it is our responsibility to make sure we're holding them accountable to having transparent conversations with our residents.
Let us assume,
and I don't think that happened here.
Let us assume for the sake of this conversation that a data center does not happen at the Landover site. It has been vacant for decades, and it is an eyesore. And unless something drastically changes with the upcoming Washington Commanders site, it is still very much up in the air as to what may happen if the DC Council votes to support a new RFK stadium. And even though it has been, reported that the Commanders ownership still has an obligation to that Northwest Stadium site, right now, what's going to happen to that is still very much up in the air. So vacant Landover Mall site, uncertainty about the Northwest Stadium site. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think we have to really start thinking outside of the box when it comes to addressing a lot of the vacant commercial property that we have in the county. I have a blighted location in my district that used to be a strip club right across the street from the metro that sit abandoned for over a decade, just boarded up. And the reality is that these businesses, it does not hurt them for them to sit on their books abandoned. They're just waiting for an opportunity. And so one of the things I did starting 2 years ago, the first thing I did was create a vacant property registry so that we could start tracking all of the commercial and residential vacant property in the county. Then I went to the state and asked the state to say, we need what DC has, the ability to tax vacant property at a higher rate. Thanks to council leadership and General Assembly, we were able to get that authority. And now myself and the chair of the county council are working on legislation to charge vacant properties 2.5 times the rate on their taxes if they stay vacant. Because we know that we have to hit these businesses where it hurts to make it that it hurts from a cost perspective to allow places like Landover Mall or the Legends Strip Club in my district or a lot of these vacant commercial properties to stay vacant. And if you do that, you're going to pay a hefty fee to the county. And so we are actively working on that. Our goal is to pass that legislation within the next year and start to see enforcement on these vacant properties. And so our goal is to push them into changing, to rehabbing, to renovating, to getting tenants into their property, saying you're just not allowed to sit on this property in our communities for decades and do nothing with them.
What would you want to see happen to the Landover Mall site if not a data center?
I think that we need to start having innovative conversations with the community and about what they would like to see there. I think we need better from our Economic Development Corporation. I'm excited about what the county executive I know has in store for what they can be doing, because what I think has not been happening is real partnership, right? I've done community walks at strip malls in my district where they're saying there's no coordination. They might have a vacant space in their strip mall. There's no communication with the Economic Development Corporation or businesses or assistance to bring in what we want to see. And then a lot of times the community's mad when it might go to another convenience store, right? And they're like, we don't want that. We want something different. But the reality is, for a lot of those businesses, they're going to take someone that can pay the rent.
Yeah.
And so I think what needs to really happen is better coordination and intentionality. We're also looking at incentives. We are going to the state to ask for better and more tax incentives for the types of industries we want to see. We don't have the ability. I was working on a sit-down restaurant tax incentive, right? One of the things we want to see is more sit-down restaurants. If we could fast track it in the permitting process, which we have, if we could add more tax incentive to these strip centers that gave their space to, or leased their space to restaurants, we have to think of packages around incentives that help bring what we want to see. And we have to do it in intentionality. And I don't think that's happened. But what I'm excited about is the leadership of the council, leadership of the county executive, and the people that she's putting in place in these different agencies are committed to doing things differently.
If you talk about, for example, a sit-down restaurant at the Landover Mall site, I mean, first of all, the site is huge. That would have to be one hell of a restaurant.
It would have to be multiple things. So when I say that, I don't think that's the only thing, right? For example, Addison Road Plaza is in my district. It's a strip mall that has, Popeyes, CVS, hair store, a gym, and we lost the grocery store, and we have 2 tobacco stores, right? One of the things I'd look at is, especially when we have investments like the Blue Line Corridor and $400+ million, is incentivizing a complete renovation of that plaza is one of the things I've been advocating for. Incentivizing what it could look like, because a lot of places, it costs money to redevelop the entire strip mall. Like if you wanted them to tear it down and rebuild it with mixed use of commercial and residential, if they're turning a profit now, what's the incentive to do that? And so that's why I say about thinking outside of the box and innovatively about it, reimagining the entire site. It's not about just what one business can you bring into the site, but how could you reimagine the whole thing? And that takes a lot of coordination to do. It's not as simple as saying, bring, 5 stores to the strip mall and it's going to be revitalized. I think strip malls are also dying. There's a reality there, right? And we are overpopulated with strip malls in Prince George's County. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of online shopping. And so the reality is we have to think about entertainment. What would draw people there, right? And partnering it with residential helps give you an organic foot traffic that makes sense for the site. And so I don't think it's as simple as one restaurant at Landover. I think it is a long-term strategic conversation. And that's why it takes parts, forcing them to do something, because it's a privately owned space. They don't have to do anything if they don't want to. They can sit on it for another decade unless they're forced. That's why the tax burden makes sense. To say, hey, this is going to be vacant. You're going to pay more on taxes. Then we don't want just anything there, right? Like what we're seeing with the data centers. They're saying, okay, well, we might have someone that's interested. Let's just bring this. No matter what the community thinks, that means we have to incentivize what we want. And so that's why it's not an easy fix. It's going to take coordination. It's going to take work. It's going to take planning. It's going to take intentionality. But I think that's why people elect all of us to serve in these seats, to do that work.
Mm-hmm. Again, with the data center, if no data center comes to Prince George's, Landover site or otherwise, because the council chair Ed Burrows has said as soon as he became chair, that was one of the first things he talked about. He talked about revenue. The county needs more money. Mm-hmm. If that doesn't happen, where else is the county going to get money? It's badly needed money. You spoke already about the deficit. So mm-hmm. How do you address that?
And I think that's what we're looking at now. Data centers are definitely part of the conversation. The chair's been vocal about that. Myself, even Shayla Adams Stafford has made it clear she doesn't think it makes sense for that site, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't look at it. And that's the importance of the task force. But we know we're possibly going to have 3 big opportunities to create revenue generation from the county. When we look at what's going to happen with FedEx, when we look at the entire Blue Line corridor, and we look at what's going to happen to Six Flags, right? When we talk about how much money we've generated from Six Flags, it is a drop in the bucket from the potential because of how large that site is, right? And so I think what we're really considering across the board is what are huge, innovative projects that make Prince George's County a destination site, an attraction for the region, and can bring revenue that is beyond what we're currently seeing by those uses. And so I think there's it's a huge potential right now because of what's happening. It's all about if we do this right? For example, Six Flags couldn't just turn into residential, right? That would be that would be one of the worst things that could happen when it comes to creating revenue. Because when we look at National Harbor, that's one of the highest generating revenue sources when it comes to commercial businesses that we have. And so we have to look at creating avenues like that and not depending so much on property taxes, right? That cannot be the only revenue generator that we have. And so that's where I think we're all looking towards right now. So data centers are, yes, definitely part of the conversation. But we know we have to do it right and we have to put it in the right place. And we know it can't cost us more on the back end when it comes to infrastructure. We just can't run after the first thing that sounds good without doing our due diligence. It's what's led us to the situation we have right now. We need thoughtful planning, thoughtful leadership on how we're going to shift our community from a bedroom community that relies so much on property taxes to a community that creates revenue like our neighboring jurisdictions that we see in DC, Virginia, and Montgomery County.
I want to talk about this maglev issue. The project is essentially dead. The superconducting maglev, magnetic levitation train project, for those who may not be familiar. A whole host of people today are happy that it is not happening. It was planned or proposed to be another transportation vehicle between basically DC and Baltimore. Your feeling about that?
I'm glad that a project didn't move forward that would go through Prince George's County but not benefit Prince George's County. I mean, that's how I always felt about the project. The reality is that it would have passed through here, and there was different plans, some that would have had really disrupt residential communities. But the reality is that it would not be a stop that benefited Prince George's County residents. And there were a lot of, questions around what were the environmental impacts going to be and what that was going to look like. And so from where I was sitting, I was always an advocate that I was elected to represent Prince George's County, specifically District 7, and my residents and the residents of this county were unhappy with the project as the way it stand. You had people that might have supported the project conceptually, but were upset that we weren't benefiting it from it. And then you had individuals that were not happy because we didn't understand yet what the environmental consequences could be for residents that would be close to the maglev. And so all in all, majority of the county wasn't supportive. And so I think that I could not support a project that would not benefit the residents of this county, nor one that we didn't understand what the consequences of from an environmental justice perspective would be.
I want to talk to you about traffic issues, the traffic fatalities appear to be out of control. And I spoke to the county executive about this about 2 weeks or so ago. And so I'll ask you the same. Obviously, there is no magic potion to fix this. And many of the issues have to go through the state. But within the county's power, the county council's power to address this, what do you believe is a solution?
Yeah, I think it's a few things, right? When we do development and understanding what are the implications going to be from a traffic perspective, I think that's key. I think, relooking at the study to see when there's new development, what are the mitigation requirements that these new developers have to put in? Because when we're putting more cars on the road and more pedestrians walking, we need to make sure that the measures that we're requiring are the standard that we need to keep the community safe. Then we're looking at the stop signs, especially in our school zones, because we've sadly seen kids being hit. Just this school year, we know a child was struck in my district. And so there's a reality, and we have a shortage of crossing guards. So the reality of implementing these stop sign monitors that are going to be able to give people tickets if they're running through the stop signs. We've already issued a few resolutions approving those across the county. It looks at investing in our infrastructure and our public transportation in a way to ensure that people can get to and from public transportation in a way that's safe. Because a lot of people, we don't have sidewalks, right, in a lot of communities. So then we have kids that are going from the bus but have to walk in the middle of the street. And so I think there's a lot of things that we have to look at around infrastructure that we are doing and going to continue to do to make sure that we can keep our residents safe.
Should there be more punitive measures to let people know that this is a problem? And I'm not talking about, for example, that horrific situation that we saw a couple of weeks ago on MLK and Sheriff Road. Obviously, that was young people who were in a stolen vehicle. But I'm talking about people who just don't seem to understand that they need to slow down. School areas or not.
Mm-hmm. No, I definitely think this is something we have to look at and see what best practices are working in other jurisdictions around the country and around the area to make our community safer, right? Because we've seen rolling out, for example, speed cameras. I know for me, I live on Central Avenue. There's speed cameras up and down Central Avenue, right? But is there a direct correlation to those hefty penalties and more penalties to less traffic accidents? I don't believe so. There's still accidents on Central Avenue. So the idea is, what is the real solution, right? What is working? Do we think that more lights, more speed bumps, more stop signs, like those things to mitigate speed are the solution, right? And so I think it's easy to say, just put up more speed lights or just increase fines, but we have to know, is that actually going to work? What has worked in other jurisdictions? And so I think taking that step back and looking at what we can do in different communities and areas. And I think the solution is going to look different depending upon the roadway. That's also a reality, right? When we're talking about, there's accidents that are happening internally in residential communities, then we have accidents on freeways. And so I don't think there's a one size fit all solution because every community and roadway is different. But I do think there's an intentionality that we need to take, and I think we're going to take moving forward.
Before I wrap up, I want to give you an opportunity to briefly talk about this upcoming prayer breakfast and what would be the purpose of having this prayer breakfast. What do you hope to accomplish with this?
Yeah, one of the things that's really important to me and the chair of the county council is really building community. And one of the complaints I hear a lot is we have, especially inside my district, a lot of churches. And people feel like, well, what are the churches doing? How are they connected? How can they be more connected? And then a lot of times the churches feel like they're not tapped in, right? And there's this disconnect, but how do we bridge the gap for the services and the resources, and how do we create a better community? And then there is also, for me, I'm a spiritual person, and there is a lot of people that are scared, genuinely scared of what's happening in our country, especially because we're so close to DC. And so having a moment to come together in community and to talk about the solutions and to pray over our young people and to pray over our leaders and then to come together and worship, I think is going to be very important to elevate and to uplift our community and then also work more in partnership. So I'm really excited about this. It's the first time we're going to have this scale of a gospel concert in Prince George's County, and myself and the chair, we are big worshipers. You kind of come into our office, you always hear gospel music playing, and I think it's something that's needed in our community. We hear a lot of hopelessness, a lot of despair, a lot of people in fear, and I think bringing people together to talk about what we can do and to have just an opportunity to pray together is going to be something that's going to really elevate the spirits and then really talk about action items. So the prayer breakfast is going to have a panel. It's going to talk about what the faith community can do. It's going to be calling on our pastors to show up in a way they might not have historically shown up, because we have to, because there's a war happening for communities that look like ours, communities that don't have resources, communities that are marginalized, and our churches are going to be our first line of defense.
Where and when is this going to be?
Yes, so our prayer breakfast will be at Maple Springs this Thursday, September 18th. And our concert will be at Ebenezer AME Church on September 19th. At 7 p.m. Both you need to register, so reaching out to Councilmember Ed Burrows or my office for registration. But we are excited to have a good time here in Prince George's County.
Krystal Oriadha, Vice Chair of the Prince George's County Council, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Good luck. Certainly the council starts its new session tomorrow, correct?
Oh, we are already in. We are 1 week into our new session.
1 weekend,
so.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so meetings tomorrow. I mean, I guess that's what I was thinking.
Yes.
About. So yeah, meeting is tomorrow. So there you go. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
That is the Daily Drum for this Monday, September 15th. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.